It was a news story that broke hearts across the nation. When the body of Sarah Payne was found on the 17th of July 2000, it brought the search for the 8-year-old girl to a devastating end. She had been missing for over 2 weeks after being snatched from the street by a known paedophile called Roy Whiting. The search for the blonde schoolgirl had captivated the whole of Britain.
Soft, gentle little girl. She hasn't got a horrible bone in her body. Somebody out there must have seen her. They must have seen her on that road. They must have seen her.
Sky News anchorman Jeremy Thompson was just one of those following the story.
The scale of the search was huge right across the country. Everybody was looking for Sarah Payne, hoping that they might help police to find her. In the end, of course, as so often happens in these sort of cases, the perpetrator was right under the police's nose, just a few miles away from where Sarah Payne had gone missing.
It was a case that affected everyone involved, including lead detective Martin Underhill.
That picture shows innocence. It also shows happiness. Those eyes, those beautiful eyes that are smiling at you, actually, they show completeness. And all that was taken away. And her photo will live forever.
The murderer, 41-year-old Roy Whiting, had long been suspected as her killer. But it took over 7 months to gather all the evidence needed to finally put him behind bars.
He was a loser, he was a loner, and he'll always be remembered for the wrong reasons, which is he was a monster who killed a little girl.
This killer's story begins almost 60 years ago. Whiting was born on January the 26th, 1959, in Horsham in West Sussex, and he grew up in nearby Crawley.
It was a family that was beset by quite a lot of tragedy. So there were 6 children and 3 of them died in infancy. So an awful lot of trauma to cope with quite early on in his life.
Life for the young man didn't get any easier. Whiting's parents, George and Pamela, divorced when he was in his teens.
Roy Whiting left school without any qualifications whatsoever. He was somebody who didn't really get along in school. He wasn't particularly academic. He didn't really fit in at all, whether socially or in terms of his studies. So he was always a bit of an outcast.
Whiting was clearly a bit of an oddball, a loner. Friends described him as a bit of a Billy No-Mates.
When you combine that with the insecure attachments he had within the family, that the lack of relationship with his mother, the disrupted relationship with his father, it does start to write a bit of a script.
As he entered adulthood, Whiting found a passion for cars, and he began working in a local garage.
In 1986, he married a woman he'd met when she was working as an attendant at a petrol station, and they had a child together, but they separated and ended up getting divorced.
By 1990, 31-year-old Whiting was living alone in his hometown of Crawley.
It's pretty clear to me that Whiting developed an increasing interest in young girls, girls in their early years. And he, I'm sure, fought to some extent to control that obsession.
Over a fortnight after the disappearance of 8-year-old Sarah Payne, the police were sure that a local man, Roy Whiting, was responsible for her abduction. But they had no solid evidence to prove it. As the search continued for the missing schoolgirl, breaking news on July the 17th, 2000, confirmed what everyone had been dreading.
Then came that day that we'd all feared. I'm sure the whole country had feared. The police announced that they had found the body of what they believed was a child about 30 feet away from a relatively main trunk road, the A29, partially covered just off a footpath. And I think we all held our breath collectively in news studios, in newsrooms and around the country and homes right across the nation, hoping that it wasn't the worst, but fearing that it probably was.
The first thing I can confirm with you now is, as a result of the post-mortem that was carried out in the early hours of this morning, this is now a murder inquiry. The second thing that you will obviously be wishing to anticipate is that we have been able to identify that the body in the field half a mile from here is Sarah Payne's.
That was a black day for the inquiry and a black day for the country, really, because everyone was still living in hope of a little girl coming home, and she didn't come home. She was found lying dead in a field, and she deserved better than that.
Sarah had been found in a shallow grave on the edge of a farmer's field.
Experts believe that the burial site where Sarah's body was found was dug by Roy Whiting very soon after he'd murdered her. So here is a sexual offender who wants to get this all over with very quickly. And it's almost as if he's just closing that chapter, saying, right, that's done, I'm moving on. There's absolutely no sense of remorse, no sense of empathy with Sarah whatsoever. He's got what he wanted and he's finished.
There was no forensic evidence on Sarah's body, so once again the police were left frustrated. They had a receipt that proved that Roy Whiting was in the region at the time, but that was all. They needed some hard evidence, and a 999 call soon gave them that.
The day that her body was found, that prompted the lady to pick up the phone and say, I should have told you before, but I saw a child's shoe at the Coolham Crossroads, and that shoe transformed the case.
This innocuous tip-off led police to the small hamlet of Coolham in West Sussex, just 8 miles from where Sarah's body had been discovered. They were certain the shoe could help unlock the case, and about 150 metres from the road where it had first been spotted, they found it, discarded in a field.
Whiting takes himself off, and of all unlikely things, goes to camp in a tent not all that far from the estate in Crawley where he abducted the girl in 1995.
Feeling the pressure, Whiting's next move was a bizarre one.
Whiting is clearly tormented, and during this period of the summer of 2000, he decides to steal a car.
And then when the police went to stop him, he drove off at speed, and in fact drove down a road the wrong way, and a high-speed chase ensued.
Faster and faster, Whiting, driving this rather tired Vauxhall as quickly as he can, eventually crashes it into another car. He's caught by the police who chased him, and of course is charged with stealing the vehicle.
This really is quite kind of out of control. It's quite reckless. And it's because he's not thinking that far ahead. He hasn't actually considered the eventuality that he needs to get away. And when he does realise that that's a possibility, he does the most ludicrous things because he hasn't got a plan.
On July the 23rd, 2000, Roy Whiting was arrested and charged with dangerous driving. He would have to remain in custody until his hearing.
And that was an amazing moment for me, because the risk level, the threat to the public disappeared. And we knew we had him. And all I had to do was keep that man in prison until we could prove he killed or abducted Sarah Payne.
Whiting's time in custody would give detectives the chance to build a case against him. They knew that if they were going to arrest him for Sarah's murder, they had to get it right.
Whilst he's in prison, police go back and re-examine his white Fiat van. Bear in mind, a white van had been seen in the lane where Sarah had gone missing. And they find in it, eventually, through very, very meticulous forensic testing, a blonde hair. The blonde hair was a 10 million to 1 shot that it had to be Sarah Payne. There was really very little forensic doubt.
The blonde hair discovered on Whiting's sweatshirt was a huge breakthrough in the case, and more strong evidence was still to come from the forensic teams.
We found fibres in that shoe which linked Whiting to the shoe and linked the shoe to Sarah. I think it was the icing on the cake for the case. It was the missing piece of the jigsaw. And then we had him, and we had him big time.
And slowly they were able to build a strong enough case against Roy Whiting to charge him with the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne.
It felt good, actually. I just kept thinking, you can't do this anymore now. We're not going to let you do this anymore because it's not okay what you did. And then the hard work started. We had to get the case to trial.
On February the 6th, 2001, while serving 22 months for the car theft, Roy Whiting was arrested in his prison cell and charged with the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne, 7 months after the disappearance of the schoolgirl.